Okay, so I'd like to talk about an interesting thing today. Nickelodeon DVD releases and how some of them, how many, most of the majority of them were sold in U.S. and Canada. Some of them were either sold in Canada with like some technicalities, or were not sold in Canada at all, due to like distribution agreements or not feeling they would. Yeah, basically you'll see what I mean. So basically, Nickelodeon, most of the DVDs the DVDs they sell are U.S. and Canada releases. Like all the Blue's Clues ones, all the Dora ones, and like Wonder Pets, Go Diego Go, that kind of thing. Even most of the compilations, they're all U.S. and Canada releases. They sell them in both places, no problems there, because they own the rights and also like SpongeBob and like Rugrats, as sold by Ginger, Jimmy Neutron, everything like that. So, but there are many, and that's not everything. Obviously, there's quite a few things though that again were not sold in the U.S. Now, I'm gonna sort of go through through the level of involvement of Nickelodeon and sort of like, or not level, you know what I mean? Like basically, I'll tell you exactly how this sort of thing. Yeah, so we're gonna start off with Max and Ruby. Now, Max and Ruby, I have three. Keep in mind, by the way, I'm a Canadian citizen, resident, whatever. Yeah, I'm Canadian, so. But I have these American Max and Ruby DVDs. I happen to find these in the wild. All sealed, actually, which is quite nice. So. Mostly old stock and stuff. As you can see, in the bottom, it says, license for sale only in U.S. Whereas if we take, like, a Blue's Clues, or whatever here, just for example, license for sale only in U.S. and Canada. So, that is telling there. Like I said, here's the, look at this one. You see, there's no Canadian rating on it or anything. It just says only in the U.S. And there's the, the disc. It just says U.S. rating and everything, yeah. And also we got Easter with Max and Ruby right here, same thing. And Berry Bunny Adventures. Now, the thing about this show is a, by the way, for this video, I'm only going for releases up to like 2008 or something like that, so that's all I'm doing. Max and Ruby is a production of Nelvana. And, well, this one is the third to fifth seasons of Max and Ruby. We're only talking about the third, because the third season is only it's only relevant up to the third season for this timeline here. Is actually produced by 9 Story Media Group, but Nelvana still owns, like, Nelvana, basically it's produced and co-owned by 9 Story, and then, it's produced by 9 Story, co-owned by 9 Story, Nelvana, distributed by Nelvana, so. But Nickelodeon holds exclusive U.S. distribution rights to Max and Ruby to this very day. Everywhere else, Nelvana owns it. And over here, in Canada, Kaboom Entertainment was the company that released them. Kaboom Entertainment and Nelvana. I don't have DVDs of those releases, but I do have VHS. Here's one. It's called Max's Rocket Run. The way they formatted them were different. This one would have like 4 complete broadcast episodes, like 100 minutes. These ones would be less than an hour. Would only have about 5 or 6 stories. Not nearly as good, but yeah. That's those. So yeah, that one, you can see there. And then Little Bear is a similar situation. Here we got Feel Better Little Bear and Rainy Day Tales. Feel Better Little Bear. Again, so only US. Little Bear is another Nelvana production. Completely owned, distributed by Nelvana. But again, in the United States, Little Bear, they have an exclusive U.S. distribution. Nickelodeon holds exclusive U.S. distribution rights to Little Bear. And it's kind of interesting, too, because Little Bear actually has a different theme song in the U.S. than in Canada. You always sort of hunger for what you grew up with. Like, I know that if you grew up in Canada, you'll probably like the Canadian song better. If you grew up in the U.S., you like the U.S. song better. I know internationally they use the Canadian one for the most part, I'm pretty sure. Though some international, though I remember I watched on back when TFO had their Retro Dimanche, which was Retro Sunday. It was a French-Canadian channel. That was on free preview. They used to air Little Bear as part of that up until like 2021. And one episode I watched on there, they used the American theme song, and another episode they used the Canadian one, which is weird. So, but anyways, Rainy Day Tales, and Feel Better Little Bear. These are U.S. releases, and these have the U.S. version. Because the different theme song, actually, what's interesting is that at the end, the show actually has a Nick Jr. Productions logo at the end. So it's, I guess they say that Nickelodeon, like, not only do they own exclusive distribution rights, but they technically localized it, I guess you could say. Even though there's not much to localize, but I'm pretty sure the music cues within the show itself are exactly the same. It's just the theme song is different. And next up is one right here. Here's Oswald. Also I should mention that for Little Bear, the Canadian releases at the time were put out by Alliance Atlantis, or formerly just Alliance when it was called that, like on VHS. But here's an example of one here. This is called Little Bear at Home. And there's the other volumes. These are the ones I'm primarily collecting for Little Bear. But I wanted all the Nickelodeon ones too, because I'm a Nickelodeon, like that era completist, so. Only at least up to 2007 though, so. And later on, it was Kaboom Entertainment and Nelvana themselves that released them in Canada. I have one of those, I don't know where it is right now though. It's called Summer Sand. Just look up Little Bear Summer Sandcastles DVD and you'll find it, so. But that's a Canadian release. Oswald is actually a co-production between Nick Jr. Productions and Hit Entertainment. Nickelodeon distributes the show in the United States. Hit Entertainment distributes it everywhere else. So obviously Mattel owns it now. Here are the U.S. releases on DVD. Again, licensed for sale only in the U.S. Welcome to Big City. And on the go, Oswald. I do have a couple of Canadian releases on VHS. Again, these are from Hit Entertainment. Here we go. There's Outdoors with Oswald, which is one of the two that makes up Welcome to Big City. And then you see there's On the Go Oswald, the Canadian version, and then the American right here on DVD. So yeah, and these ones are only sold in Canada. But what's funny is that on the Outdoors with Oswald tape it says Rubber Dubbers coming soon to Nick Jr., whereas in Canada, all those shows would be airing on Treehouse, so yeah. Treehouse was the bomb. That was a great channel. And now we're going to get to an example of something that was an example of a show that, like, initially was supposed to be through a different company in Canada, but it ended up not being. That is the Fairly Odd Parents. Now, I have a few examples here. I'm going to save the last one until another part of the video. Here we got Outer Catastrophe the movie, Superhero Spectacle, Channel Chasers, Schools Out the Musical. Now, one thing that people might not know about Fairly Odd Parents is that, believe it or not, despite being fully a Nickelodeon production, like it's produced by Nickelodeon owns the copyright, they produce the show and everything, international distribution rights to the first 5 seasons of Fairly Odd Parents are owned by Nelvana. And, because they made a deal back in the day, back in like 2001, to distribute, to hold the distribution rights to 2 shows, Fairly Odd Parents and Taina, which Taina is, that's a live action show, and that's not on DVD or anything, but yeah. Interesting to know that Nickelodeon, Nelvana distributes those 2 shows outside of the United States. Now, because of that, in Canada, they didn't sell these for a while. These are the first 3. These were the ones that were U.S. only from the get-go. Because at the time, I'm pretty sure, it was planned that, I would assume it was planned that Kaboom Entertainment was going to release the DVDs. Now, Kaboom Entertainment, I'll give an example of one of their releases. Look, I'll just pick up the Berenstain Bears, what other shows do I have from them? I'm just, one with their sort of design. I'll give you actually an example of one of the a VHS. Just imagine this DVD sized. Would have looked like this sort of in the middle. This is an example of Berenstain Bears. So yeah, that's a Canadian release of that one. And for that one and like Megan vs. Beast, the U.S. releases were from Columbia TriStar, Sony Pictures. So yeah, that doesn't count here. But anyways, I would guess that Fairly Odd Parents was probably supposed to be through Kaboom Entertainment in Canada. But probably there was some dispute because Nickelodeon was one of the producers of the production companies of the show, or something like that in US and Canada, and because of the brand synergy of it still being on YTV in Canada, which was owned by the same parent company, which has the same parent company as Nelvana, but is its own, but also is the has always historically been called the Canadian equivalent to Nickelodeon. I guess they figured it's just easier to have them do that. So these ones retroactively got a DVD release in Canada on October 26th, 2004. And I know that because I saw it online, and plus the previews from the Canadian copy of Abracatastrophe on VHS reflect that. Now, I will mention as well, the last part of the video I will mention actually. I'll mention something else with it, but let me just show you the superhero spectacle first, and then I have to go. I don't have a Canadian one to show you, but I'm gonna go to my computer. Yeah, I wanted the American ones of these ones though. I just think they look nicer. So, like if I had started collecting the Canadian ones, I would have gone with other Canadian copies. But believe it or not, despite me being in Canada, I've actually found these American ones to be quite easier to find. Now, I bought Superhero Spectacle and Abracatastrophe in New York. The other two though that I have here, all the other American Fairly Odd Parents DVDs I bought in Canada. So. But I would assume because these are, yeah. So here's Superhero Spectacle, the DVD from the original DVD release from the US from February 3rd, 2004. Now let me just go over quickly to the computer. Okay, on eBay I could not find a DVD version of the Canadian copy. Just goes to show how uncommon they are. But I did find the VHS. You can see, oh, the thing just moved there. It's you can see that the same thing, except all references to all the Nickelodeon like logos and everything are taken off and replaced by those of Nelvana. So it's the same release, just a similar cover, but different as well, and it has the Nelvana logo instead of Nickelodeon. So it still gives credit to Viacom International and everything, but yeah, because Nelvana owned distribution rights, and that's the thing. It's sort of. It's as if it's still from Paramount, but it's at the discretion of Nelvana rather than being at the discretion of Nickelodeon. And here's another one here's one I don't have. Although again, I plan to complete my set of all these kind of things. This is Jimmy Timmy Power Hour on DVD. Initially, this was a U.S. only release, but this copy, which I assume was also released on October 26, 2004. Says licensed for sale in U.S. and Canada, and it has a Canadian rating there. You can see where my little magnifying glass cursor is. There it is. Initially, it was a U.S. only. Let me see if I can find a copy of the U.S. only one. Yeah, I found one that was the U.S. only one. You can see in the bottom, there's no Canadian rating, and it just says licensed for sale only in the U.S. My guess is that despite Nelvana's allowing of things to be like on compilations even years ago, which I'll get into in the second part of the video. So just to hold off on that, just keep that information in your head, that they just decided to not, this one, because it was considered a Fairly Odd Parents release and a Jimmy Neutron release, and because of the special or whatever, must have been some rights issues with the special, they kept this on the US, and I would guess that probably Kaboom Entertainment was probably going to release the special in Canada too, and that's probably why. But, because I do know that Jimmy Kimmel Power Hour 1 isn't part of the rotation wasn't ever part of the rotation of Fairly Odd Parents in Canada. But the rotation on reruns on Nickelodeon Canada and on the Nelvana YouTube pages, they have the whole. That's why Paramount Plus in Canada doesn't have seasons 1 through 5, because instead they're through the Treehouse. They get them through Treehouse Direct on YouTube. But they do have seasons the Jimmy Kimmel Power Hours 2 and 3 split into 2 parts in reruns. They didn't do that with the first one though, so. But yeah, it's interesting. So, but I would guess that Jimmy Kimmel Power Hour Kaboom was probably going to release that on DVD too. But once they figured out the deal with that, they didn't want to put Nelvana on the cover though, because it was also a Jimmy Neutron release, and because of their thing with Nelvana and compilations, which I'll get into once we get into the compilations. It probably was just stick a Nick label on it, and that's that. So, and Jimmy Kimmel Power Hour 2 also had no problems being released in both the US and Canada. So yeah. But with Timmy's Top Wishes, School's Out the Musical, and Scary Godparents, the US and Canada ones came out day and date. So whereas these first ones, the Canadian ones came out at a later date because they delayed the Canadian releases due to supposedly having originally planning to be from another company. So yeah. And another one that's that whole Nelvana Nickelodeon thing is The Backyardigans. Although this time, the show is actually a co-production between the two companies. Unlike Fairly Odd Parents, where they just own the distribution rights internationally. Again, keep in mind that only seasons 1 through 5 are distributed by Nelvana internationally. Seasons 6 through 10 are distributed by Nickelodeon worldwide. Fairly Odd Parents, which is another thing I'll get into in a little bit. Backyardigans. This happens to be all the DVD releases. These 5 DVDs make up the complete first season. So, and then the next 5 make up the complete second season. I'm pretty sure. So yeah. But yeah. Nice set of DVDs. And these are the Canadian copies. Now, I will show you an example of what an American one looks like. Let me just go inside, in case they have an advertisement in here. You can see there's the American version of It's Great to Be a Ghost. And then here's the Canadian one. So there's no Nickelodeon thing there. It says Nelvana instead. Canadian copy. And this one says licensed for sale only in Canada. Now, one thing I will mention about these is that starting with the first volume here, again, despite them coming out with US and Canada, since they were primarily a US market, they print the discs without the Canadian rating, because it has the Nick Jr. label on the disc. But then starting with the second volume, The Snow Fort, even though the case was just US or Canada, the disc was printed with both in mind. I guess they figured, yeah. You can see, there it is. And yeah, again, I would guess why these are were still released to Paramount in Canada and not Kaboom Entertainment is because of Nickelodeon's involvement in the production. I would guess. Though, funnily enough, Cave Party doesn't even have the Nelvana logo on the front of the spine, just the back. That's really interesting. Really weird. It's probably a typo. Anyways, and then here's Lazy Town. Now, Lazy Town is a similar thing. Now, this one is not a Nickelodeon production at all. It's produced by Lazy Town Entertainment, which is the in-house company that makes the show from Iceland. Now, in the US, the DVDs didn't exactly... Let me just open this one up to show you an example. Didn't exactly have a Nick Jr. branding like all the other ones. Didn't look like this. They would have just a thing that would say, as seen on Nick Jr. on the tape, and then Nick Jr. DVD on the... it would be a smaller print. Probably due to some contract thing. And they still have the Nick Jr. DVD logo. The Canadian copies, though, omit any references on the cover to Nickelodeon. And everything. And so, again, much like how those are like, as if it's Paramount at the discretion of Nickelodeon, these are not Paramount at the discretion of Nickelodeon. These are Paramount at the discretion of Lazy Town Entertainment, these Canadian copies. But again, same discs inside. Now, it's obvious that the changeover to that thing happened sometime like after October 2005, because, like I said, that Backyardigans Great to Be a Ghost didn't have the Canadian rating on the disc, but the Snow Fort did. Lazy Town Surprise Santa released October, because that was between August and November 2005. Lazy Town Surprise Santa, which is October 2005, it still doesn't. And same with all those Fairly Odd Parents ones that were US and Canada at the same time, they don't have those either. Whereas Records Day, later in 2006, does. So there you go. That's how that works. And there were a couple other shows that were not available in the U.S. due to licensing issues and distribution issues. Particularly the two shows that were live action shows that were co-productions with Dolphin Entertainment. Those being Ned's Declassified School Survival Guide and Zoe 101. Nickelodeon released those DVDs in the U.S., but in Canada, Dolphin Entertainment controlled who had distribution, hence why they were on Family Channel in Canada, not YTV. And Alliance Atlantis, or later Alliance Films, released the DVDs in Canada, at least for Zoe. I think they were planning to for Ned, but they didn't actually end up doing that. But then there also is the type of DVD of that they didn't have any reason not to release it in Canada. They just didn't. And one example of that is the Amanda Show. Now, that was on Family Channel as well, but before, that was back when each acquisition was on a case-by-case basis. YTV didn't really become the exclusive thing until later for Canadian broadcasting for Nickelodeon shows. I don't have any Amanda Show releases, by the way, to show you, unfortunately. But, though I'm not really interested in getting any of those myself. So, the release of that. But again, as far as I know, there's no distribution hurdles in Canada. And yet, for some reason, those 3 DVD releases and VHS whatever are licensed for sale only in the US. I have no idea why. But anyways. Another example of that is Rocket Power Island of the Menehune. Now, this one does have a promotion in here on the back. This is the only one that has a promotion for like Life cereal, like Quaker, like it's a Quaker commercial basically, like a Quaker promotion sort of. It was sold at retail. Just they used this to advertise it. Now maybe it has something to do with that, but it really is strange how it's U.S. only. Because this show, again, is fully owned by Nickelodeon, both U.S. and Canada. There's no distribution hurdles, like distribution differences of that. Maybe they just didn't think it would sell well over here. I don't know why, but anyways. Again, a lot of these U.S. only ones I happen to find in Canada, so maybe people will get them across the border or something like that, or old stock. I forget exactly how it is. And then these 2 releases as well are also ones that are not U.S. These ones, though, are Fairly Odd Parents, so you think maybe there was some hurdle with that. It's still with Nelvana. No, they could have just easily printed... Like, this one, Jimmy Kimmel Power Hour 1 eventually, and then also 2 didn't have any problems coming out in Canada, so why would 3 have any problems? They just decided to release this only in the States because of the fact that they just didn't feel... Like, what's maybe the first 2 volumes sold better in the States than they did in Canada or something like that, so... Again, just full U.S. release, so... Then there's Fairly Odd Parents Fairy Idol. Again, they could have done this with the Nelvana packaging, but they didn't, so... And that's why if this had been a Nelvana package in Canada, this disc would have had a Canadian release, but again, they decided to make this one US only for some weird reason. And that also brings me to the fact that Season 6, Volume 1 was also released. That was all the way in 2008. And again, that's the Fairly Odd Parents season, one of the first Fairly Odd Parents season that's owned by Nickelodeon worldwide. But again, they just made Season 6, Volume 1 a US only release. Probably because they didn't think it would sell as well in Canada. Maybe the Fairly Odd Parents volume sold better in the States than they did in Canada. So, and I would assume maybe that has something to do with the fact that maybe because the covers in Canada didn't have say Nickelodeon on them, people didn't realize it was a Nickelodeon show, and like because the name Nickelodeon is a big brand, it would help sell copies, I'd say. So that's probably it. But they couldn't not have that on there. So that's besides the Jimmy Kimmel Power Hour. So yeah. Now I'll go into the second part of this editorial rant, whatever lesson, whatever you want to call it. Compilations. Now, there were a couple of compilations that were Walmart exclusives. There was Nickstravaganza 2, and then there was the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Winners Collection. Judging by what I'm going to tell you here, I don't see why they had to make Nickstravaganza 2, U.S. exclusive. Again, probably because of selling things. Because I have Nick Jr.'s Imagine That, which is a Walmart exclusive and was a U.S. and Canada. In fact, my copy is a Canadian copy of that one. So, Nick Jr.'s Imagine That. That's a VHS though. I'm talking about, but I'm talking about just DVDs here. So, but then the Nickelodeon Kids' Choice Winners, judging by what you'll hear about because Zoe 101's included on there, and what you're going to hear when I talk about this thing, that wasn't available in Canada, and that's understandable. So, but for retail ones, these are wrong order. Actually, I got to put them in this order. These are Nicktoons Halloween and Nicktoons Christmas. These came out in 2003, August and September respectively. Again, when they thought Fairly Odd Parents Paramount didn't have Canadian DVD rights to it yet. Yet, despite them being on there in that time period, licensed for sale only in US and Canada, and there's a Canadian rating on there. There's the disc there. All US and Canada things. Now, this one says licensed for sale only in US on here, but it has a Canadian rating on the disc and on there, so that's obviously just a typo. So this one, and in fact I bought this at a Walmart in Canada, in my Canada, and I live in a province that does not border the US actually. So what does that tell you? Anyways, that's the thing there. So that was obviously just a typo. All the other Nick Picks volumes, because they came out after that whole Fairly Odd Parents thing, they all had no problems releasing in Canada either. Now, because again, that's the thing with those. everything on there. Now, when we come to Nick Jr. DVDs, I don't have Nick Jr. Favorites 1, unfortunately, but that was a US-only release. You would think that Nickelodeon ones, because most of them included Max and Ruby, which was, again, not released through Paramount on DVD in Canada. In fact, actually, Nick Jr. Celebrates Spring predated any Max and Ruby home video release in either US or Canada. This is the first time it was on DVD. Now, Max and Ruby was a fully Nelvana production. This is the first time it was on DVD in this compilation. Still, licensed for sale only in US and Canada. And judging by the pattern of what they did with Fairly Odd Parents before, and also, and what they did here and other volumes here, it's obvious that Nelvana, while they would want to release their own releases themselves, they would still allow the content they owned, if it had a connection to Nickelodeon, to be on Nickelodeon compilations in Canada. They would still sort of allow that and license it. Other companies, though, not so much, because now Nick Picks 5 was the last volume of Nick Picks. They were going to do a Nick Picks 6, but it ended up getting canceled. They had a show on Nick Picks 5 called Mr. Meaty. It's another Canadian show co-produced by 3J's Productions, and it was, I guess they control distribution in Canada, and that's because it was on there. They didn't allow that DVD was a US only release, whereas all the other Nick Picks were all US and Canada. Nick Jr. Favorites 1, which I don't have, was also US only, and again, most people would think, also because of Max and Ruby would have to do this as well, but no, because it was Max and Ruby was able to be on here in Canada. There was another show that made sure it wasn't allowed to be on there in Canada. Oswald. Again, because Oswald is through Hit Entertainment in Canada. So they didn't know that's why Nick Picks 1, Nick Jr. Favorites 1 and Nick Jr. Favorites Holiday are not available in Canada, because they had Oswald episodes on there. Though Nick Jr. Favorites 2 doesn't have Oswald on it. It has everything is good to go for releases. Especially since, you might think, maybe Lazytown also did that too. Because of when you sure that those Canadian releases came out day and date. I know they did, because I had Canadian copy of Blues Room Alphabet Power on VHS growing up. And it had, which again, I'll get into why that's important later. And it had the trailer for Lazytown on it, so therefore there was no problems there. I guess they, again, just figured this one would sell better in Canada, I guess, yeah. Or wouldn't sell as well in Canada. But yeah, Nick Jr. Favorites 3, 4, 5, and then again 6, which I don't have, and all the feature volumes were all sold in Canada, as well as US. Now, what's funny is that I remember going to Walmart in Canada and having Nick Jr. Favorites volumes 1 to 3 in my cart, and then we didn't end up buying it. Maybe I dreamt it, or maybe I'm misremembering something, but I could have sworn that the box set of 1 through 3 was available in Canada. But most likely because of what I'm saying, everything, it most likely wasn't. Maybe it was the 4 through 6 box. I remember being the lighter color, though, but again, I could be wrong, so yeah. And I know for a fact that one was US only, again, because it says licensed for sale in the US. And inside Nick Jr. Favorites 4, they have advertisements inside here. It says Nick Jr. Favorites 1 and 2 available in US only, whereas number 3 doesn't say that. So that's that there. And Teen Nick Picks, there was one volume of that, and that was US only because of the inclusion of Ned's Declassified and Zoe 101. So the ground rule for that is basically, for compilations, Nelvana, Kaboom Entertainment, Nelvana, whatever, would always let their episodes be on compilations. But other companies wouldn't, so that's the drawback there. Now, the third part of this I want to mention, masters. One thing you have to remember is that for Paramount releases at the time, at least, pretty much, all the time, for VHS tapes, here's just I'm going to show an example here. Here's a Junior Neutron One Pants Attack. This is an American copy. Use a sticker label. In the Canadian copies, usually would use a... let's just see. I'm just checking if this is correct. Yeah, an ink label. Now, another way to find out if it's an American Canadian copy usually is does it say warning or FBI warning on the tape label. And DVDs, though, they didn't. They just used the same one for both things. Because, like, for example, Blue takes you to school. For example, here's a DVD. The American VHS of that. The previews it has on there are Rugrats Go Wild, the Nick Jr. Celebrates promo that has Blue's Clues, Dora, and Oswald, then an Oswald promo, then Charlotte's Web 2, and then Wild Thornberry's movie. The Canadian VHS just has Rugrats Go Wild, Nick Jr. Celebrates with just Dora and Blue, and then Charlotte's Web 2, Wilbur's Great... Or actually, I forgot to mention Jimmy Neutron trailers on there, too, for both those. And then after Jimmy Neutron, then Charlotte's Web 2, and then Wild Thornberry's movie. So you notice they're not talking about Oswald on that. Whereas the DVD, because the DVD they wanted to do it for both US and Canada, because all the stuff that is on the Canadian tape is still relevant to the States, therefore they decided to just do that. Similar reason as to why all the Backyardigans and Fairly OddParents DVDs that were sold in Canada, or at least the Fairly OddParents numbers for, like, the Timmy Stopwishes, Schools Out the Musical, and Scary Godparents, not the first few volumes. Why, when you watch those DVD openings, they open with both a Nickelodeon logo and an Nelvana logo. But to me, that makes it confusing because whoever's releasing it at the discretion of whoever, the Nickelodeon logo is irrelevant for Canadians, and the Nelvana logo is irrelevant for Americans. Same with Lazy Town. The Canadian DVD still the Nick Jr. logo at the beginning of those DVDs. But again, that's irrelevant for Canadians, so it should just be the Paramount logo. Anyways, that's what I think. And but like when DVDs that were only sold in America, they have all the American promos. Like some examples of American promos, like for a while, Fairly OddParents, they only had the promo on American DVDs, then they added them to the US and Canada ones too. So yeah, it's quite confusing what I'm saying. I'm sorry if you can't keep up with me. And in fact, I'm actually having trouble sometimes too. So I'll make a list actually at some point. I'm planning to make a list and I might publish it somewhere, and to show which ones were US only, which ones were in US and Canada, and which ones were US only, and which ones were like maybe initially US only and then later US and Canada, and which ones were like initially US only and then later US and Canada with like a technicality or something like that. Like without the Nickelodeon branding or something like that. So I'll make a list and I'll make like little symbols or little like a legend to show sort of what each one did. So yeah. Look on all your Nickelodeon DVDs and check in the back and see which ones are US only and which ones are US and Canada. And again, that might not be because, like I said, Fairly OddParents, these are just the American copies. So yeah. Quite an interesting thing to note. By the way, I recently got those Backyardigans. It's great to be a Ghost and Polka Palace party just today, the day I'm filming this. When I filmed my Nick Jr. DVD collection, I didn't have those, so yeah. And the third part with the Nickelodeon live action series and movies will be up soon. I just had to edit the video because I accidentally let a curse word slip out. And while I don't have a problem with cursing, I'm a 23-year-old man. No problem with cursing. I just felt it came off as a bit... I felt guilty saying it because it came off as a bit unprofessional, especially when talking about stuff for kids, so... But as I said, at least it would make my video not get marked as made for kids, but I just rather would just get rid of it. I just find it's not... Like, it's just a habit, and I need to work on it, so that's all. That's the only reason why that video's taking a little longer, so... Anyways. Yeah. Thanks for watching.